welcome to Identity Center Live. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. Happy Friday. Happy April Fool's Day.
Yes, happy April Fool's Day. You're
If
saying
everyone
this like
sent,
there was
saw,
something in the works.
well, there was something in the works. You and I were goofing around with SnapCam.
Yeah.
Um, we weren't quite confident enough to use it for today, so maybe next year.
Yeah, we've been tossing around the idea of potato chat and just doing potato filters for our pictures.
Well, I think, you and I, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who have that one person or a couple of people that they talk to at work, and you can kind of like, talk about your real life stuff and
Hmm.
your interests and maybe politics and stuff like that. Um, that doesn't have a place here on kind of a professional focus because, we might talk about how we feel about politics. Somebody might hear what we think, not like it, and then not want to listen to our show about identity management. We don't want to lose people for that.
Yeah, I mean that's not at least not my area of expertise. I'll stick to identity and technology in general.
Well,
and
that's it. Yeah,
that's it.
generally we sound pretty smart here, but if we get into those topics, we're probably not that smart.
Well, yeah, I would not disagree with that at all. I think we could probably pull off snap filters or something like that. It was just, kind of pulling back transparency. It's been kind of a crazy day. I think, for me trying to run around, kind of get some last minute things done. And I was thinking during the week, actually last night, I was like, oh, I should, try to figure out some sort of April Fool's joke to play. My original goal was to like take your audio and make you sound like a chipmunk, but not tell you, and have like something on the screen that would say like Jim doesn't know that I've swapped his voice for a chipmunk or something like that. But I just didn't have
That
time to
would
work it
be
out.
that would be funny, but you realize there could be millions of people that tune into the show,
Yeah.
and that would be really, really embarrassing for me, Jeff. I don't know if I could recover from that.
Yeah, well, I mean that's I love to play a good prank on folks. It's April Fools. I think we're gonna be pretty clear here. So this is a safe place. The internet will have one as usual with whatever pranks are out there. I think I saw one from
Yeah.
Razer, the computer company that does like a lot of gaming hardware, where they have like I don't know what they called it, but it was like an immersive suit for like the metaverse. You put it on, and it's like it has a bunch of motors in it to, I guess, make you feel like you're, like haptic feedback against with inputs
Which
from whatever the metaverse come from.
is
Probably not too far off
great,
from the
but
real.
it kind of goes. Well, it's a great idea, but it goes back to our point that with our conversation with Dan Creed,
Hmm.
from Meta, it's the hardware has to catch up. It's got to, and I think the debate is very real about um, artificial intelligence or artificial intelligence versus or what do you call it, virtual reality versus augmented reality.
Hmm.
And I feel like the augmented reality probably has more people in its camp right now, and the solution for having an immersive experience is you got to put a suit on with like nodes all over your body.
Yeah.
People probably the mainstream are probably not going to do it.
Yes, it's expensive. It doesn't make sense. People will not be ready to receive that yet. We're not yet at the level of technology where it's like the Matrix, and we're just batteries in this giant power plant, and we're living in essentially a very high fidelity metaverse that most people have adopted as reality, unless you're Morpheus or Neo or Trinity or any of those.
Well, I have a very real question because I've wondered this many times, and since this show has a little bit more leeway in terms of wasting time,
Yeah,
why did 3D TV never take off?
the price and the fidelity wasn't there, so it was very expensive. If you remember, like a 3D TV was like $10,000, like a good one, like one that was actually like of a brand that you probably would trust. But then the price was so high, so the adoption never came, which meant that nobody did content for it, which further pulled it down the spiral of, well, there's no content, why should I get it? And it just spiraled down and down in there. So it's very much like if you think of like any new media format, there's CDs, there's, well, before that, right, vinyl, cassette, or actually for that LPs. That's how old I am. And then cassette, then CDs, and then it was laser
Eight
disc.
tracks.
Yeah, 8 tracks. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Was LPs, 8 tracks. But then you have like laser disc was like the big thing for a while, and it was like super high fidelity. On the video side, you had standard definition, then HD, and then it become what flavor of HD. And now there's even 8K video coming out, which
Right.
is absolutely crazy from like a resolution standpoint, but it's really not usable in the real world because we don't have screens that are capable of 8K. So kind of what's the point of it? Typically what you'll see in is like on an 8K camera, for example, it's an 8K camera, but they crop it in to 4K to help with things like image stabilization. So
Okay.
you can shake the camera a little bit more, but because it's cropped down, the video is more stabilized because it has more leeway around the sides. As I kick my computer here.
So the idea with 3D, I don't know. Did you have a 3D TV?
Mm-mm.
And because to me, like I love 3D. Like when I go to a movie theater and I can see 3D, I loved it. I always thought like, oh, that would be really cool to watch a sporting event in 3D. But I don't know if how the 3D TVs did in the real world.
They just didn't. It was too expensive. Didn't make sense. You had to wear the glasses.
No, but I
It
mean,
just
was the
wasn't.
content like fun to watch?
It was rudimentary. It was one of those things like, okay, I've seen it once. I don't know if I would spend 10K on it.
No.
I think where things are at today from a technology standpoint, when you have relatively lower cost VR masks like Meta Quest 2, right, or something like that, where it's a self-contained thing, it's certainly a lot better. Not great, but still a lot better. I mean, it's an interesting way to watch TV. I actually find that my eyes get more tired watching things in a VR environment through like, a mask than just
Hmm.
normal television.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Coming in from just so many angles, or
I think it's probably maybe it's just a me. I'm like, staring at it wide-eyed, trying to take it all in.
yeah, right.
And the screens are very close. The depth is not quite the same as if you're looking at a monitor. Maybe that's, a couple feet away like I am right now. I just find it more tiring and my eyes get drier kind of quicker just when I have a mask over it. It's heavy. It's not
Yeah,
comfortable.
it's heavy. It's not comfortable. I know that part.
Yeah.
What about the curved monitors? Why did they curve monitors?
I think they're still great. I have one right now. I'm on a 34-inch, slightly curved, ultra wide screen, and it's fantastic. It's not like an extreme curve, but it's just enough that if you're sitting at the right point, it eliminates glares when you have a wide screen, where you're seeing things like
So
kind of
the
reflection off to the side.
Oh, so that's the reason why they do it is to reduce glare.
Reduces the glare and
Oh,
reflections that you might get from things kind of around you, but also makes it so that you're a little bit at the center of each of your views. So as I look at the left of my widescreen all the way over here, and then the right of my widescreen, you can probably tell right where my eyes are
yeah,
going because it's such a wide space. I would go
right.
wider if I could. Maybe that's the next upgrade for me.
Yeah. Well, I always figured it had something to do with like just getting more screen real estate within your field of vision or something like that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's the equivalent of having two 1080p or really the resolution I run at would be two 720p monitors next to each other, but like
Okay.
two, I'm gonna guess like 17-inch screens. So rather than having multiple monitors, which I still do have, I have one monitor over here. I have my ultra wide, and then I have the notebook over on my right. I'm running essentially a three monitor setup, but 95% of what I do is on this widescreen in the middle.
Looks like my video is really not that good compared to yours. I think it's because it's messing with all those Snapchat filters. I
Yeah,
feel
it
like
could be
I'm
that.
kind of washed out looking.
I'm running a real camera too. That also helps from a
Yeah.
quality perspective. So there'll always be a jump there. But we've got a good camera. We've got a Brio. We got you upgraded not too long ago.
I finally, I opened up the wallet and, George Washington went like this. Like, oh my God, I haven't seen sunlight in so long.
Yeah. Well, if you want to go to the next step up would be some sort of real kind of digital camera, either a DSLR or a mirrorless or something like that. And that's when you start really getting into the tears in your eyes as you're parting way with some of that money.
Yeah, right. So, what are we going to talk about from an IAM perspective today?
We have to talk identity. It's April Fool's. We can do other stuff, can't we?
No,
Let's talk
no,
identity.
not on this podcast.
This was your idea, so let me do through the fancy video production here. We wanted to talk about IAM steering committees, and my tagline below it was what, why, who, and when. That's kind of what I was thinking of the way we would approach. What is this thing called a steering committee? Why do we need it? Who's on it? When do you need it? Right, those sorts of things, and kind of everything in between. Anything you want to preface it before I, through the power of the internet, move us to the next slide in quotation marks?
No, but I mean it's like the who, what, why, where, and when, but just in a different order.
Yeah. Well, that's the way my brain
But everybody
thinks.
probably figured that out, right?
Yeah, I hope so. If they didn't, let's talk about what is an IAM steering committee, because I think this is one of the questions we get a lot. Is kind of like, well, what's the appropriate governance for our IAM program? And to me, it's one of those governing bodies within specifically IAM that really kind of sets the direction and makes decisions on what's going to get done from an identity perspective. How do you define it?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think what you're trying to do is have governance over your IAM program, and from governance, what you mean is you want to have, you know, the right people making the right decisions. I think in order to do that, you also have to make sure that you're communicating. So there's many things that a steering committee will help you accomplish. One is it will help you over communicate, which is much better than under communicating, but making sure that you're getting the information out there. And the types of information would include operational, what's going on with the program in terms of delivering on IAM. Are you working, toward the goals, the metrics the KPIs that you've set, in terms of say for example, you're trying to you automate access provisioning more than what you are today, with the goal of like fully automating provisioning someday, which might be kind of a pie in the sky, but you want to show that you're making progress towards that goal on a periodic or on a regular basis. So every month or every quarter, however often your steering committee meets, you're showing that your percentage of provisioning events that happen automatically is increasing. So that's just an example. So that's number one, is you want to talk about operational metrics, and then the other thing is you want to touch base on projects. How are the project portfolio going? If you have an effort to migrate your HR system to Workday, there's a major IAM component to that. So you probably co-update on that. Maybe you have the project manager from that project who's involved with the steering committee on for a while, and they speak to efforts relative to identity and access management. I think that's a lot of what's happening, is communicating, and then I think there are going to be areas where decisions need to be made, and bringing those decisions that need to be made to the table. I think is going to be one of the things that the steering committee does.
I think that's probably the most important thing, is that the steering committee is making decisions. They either have enough authority directly or via proxy or whatever mandate they've been given to actually make decisions and say, okay, we're going to do this. Right? A lot of times an organization will have like good ideas, right? Or somebody within a team is like, oh, that's a great idea. Why don't we do it? Because somebody's waiting for permission somewhere to do it, probably.
Right.
This is where the steering committee will come in, and ultimately the buck's going to stop there and say, okay, great, we've agreed on the strategy, the deployment, whatever it is that we're going to do, the service update, whatever. Okay, what do we need to actually get it done? Do we need just someone to say, yes, approved? Do we need budget to be assigned, resources to be unblocked, whatever it looks like? For me, that's the most important thing that a steering committee can do, is make decisions. Again,
Right.
either directly authority or they have proxy authority or something that lets them break through, the red tape, the bureaucracy, whatever it might look like, to get things done.
I'm with you. So the next thing I wanted to bring up is it would be the why.
Why is it needed? Why do we need this?
Why is I think that, for me, what is the compelling reason for why you need a steering committee is to get to the point of buy-in. Every client that we've ever talked to about developing their IAM strategy, they want an IAM strategy that will achieve buy-in. What does that mean? Well, I think it means that you've got your key stakeholders. Pretty much everybody's on board, but especially your key stakeholders. Um, they're on board with the strategy. They're evangelizing the strategy to the folks that are on their team, and they have the seat at the table to identify areas and avoid the pitfalls of, not having a strategy that aligns with other business interests that they have. So to me, that's why you have it, is to drive that buy-in to what the IM program is doing.
I'm gonna repeat myself
What's
again.
your
Why do
why?
you need it? Somebody needs to make decisions. The buy-in comes along with it for sure. I totally agree with that. But I'm trying to keep it relatively simple for my Friday afternoon brain.
Yeah,
And
right,
why do you need this? Someone has to make decisions, or some group needs to come together to make a decision on something. That's the way I look at it.
right.
Simple.
Well, and so an example of a decision. So the example that comes to my mind might be, we want to make an update to the password policy.
Hmm.
Right now, you're kind of like, right, this could be controversial, right? It sounds like pretty simple, right? Oh, we want to go from 8 characters to 12 characters, and
Whoa, whoa,
I
whoa!
mean
Hold
that
on. You're gonna wreck the
hold the
user
boat.
experience. We can't remember 8 characters. How are we gonna tell people about this change? What are we gonna do to actually enforce it? Jim, you're crazy, man.
Yeah, crazy ideas. But look, I mean, if you go and approach this where, okay, we just are going to make a decision in our vacuum and roll out a password change process that people may not have known about, but might not have had buy-in. That's a recipe for, people slamming you um, behind the scenes, and passive resistance and all those things that can sink you professionally, but also sink the success of your program and the trust in your program that, hey, you're going to be able to take on bigger initiatives beyond changing changing passwords. Like, oh man, you guys like did such a poor job with implementing a new password policy. Who's going to trust you to spend $1 million to implement a governance solution or privilege access management?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you gotta build some currency and demonstrate that you can actually be successful. And you don't if you're doing these things in a vacuum without notification of others and bringing people to the party, gonna have a bad time, man.
Yeah,
So
think about it. If like everybody's on board and you've really had buy-in, like okay, everybody's like agrees that the plan is going to work, and then you hit some bumps in the road. One, you're going to have that evangelist and somebody who's like out there trying to buffer the impact of that, but also like everybody was on board, so it's not like you just went off the deep end and kind of did it on your own. So it does give you some buffer there.
yeah, one of those times like no guts, no glory. Maybe look before you leap, especially in
Yeah,
an enterprise. Certainly makes it
right.
a little bit easier to swallow. Do we want to move on to the next one?
Let's move on to the next one.
So we've got a steering committee. We know what it is. We know why it is. Who's part of it? Who's in the
I'm going to
steering
steal
committee?
what I think your answer is going to be, which was people who have enough juice, right?
Yep,
But what I was thinking was maybe we could just touch
at
on
least.
like some of our experience. Yeah, some of our experience, like with where how we've seen it set up at places. So I was in a corporation which had business units, and each of those business units had a CIO for that business unit, right? They all reported to the global CIO, but in that case, having those people on board, they were kind of like in between the business and IT. So either they would be part of the steering committee, or they'd have delegates as part of the steering committee, so they're lieutenants, or both would be part of the steering committee, right? And we, obviously, um, I was going to get into kind of voting rights because I think that's where some people's mind goes to when it comes to governance. Like, okay, well, you manage 10,000 people, someone over here manages 5,000 people, so maybe the 10,000 should get their vote should count as double. I don't know. I mean, that's not what we're talking about here, right? Um, so anyway, I've seen like that CIO approach work. I've also seen an approach where it's more key stakeholders. So somebody from HR, somebody from one of your key platforms like SAP. So if you're running SAP, someone from the help desk side of it, someone from major department like finance. Um, Basically, it's you have to know know your audience, right? Know who the heavy hitters are within your organization and who are the heavy consumers of IAM, and try not to leave anybody out from that perspective.
Yeah, I kind of see the membership of that steering committee growing and contracting over time based on where the program is. I think you'll always have like a couple of core people that are part of it. Probably your IAM program manager, or maybe an IAM sponsor of some sort. Maybe another one or two or three other people that are kind of like there all the time. And then you pull in other areas based on whatever it is that you're doing or whatever phase you're in. You use the kind of example of like HR before. If you're tying back to HR at some point for an authoritative source, you pull the HR people in, work with them to get things set up. Are they there forever? Probably not, but they're probably there long enough to make sure that the integration between an HR platform or any other human capital management platform and your IAM systems is there. And maybe pull in other areas as well, like the business, especially if there's going to be things that are impacting the end user experience or maybe customer side of things, marketing, legal, audit. I mean, there's a whole bunch of areas. I think you'll have like the center, like they're the full timers, and then the part timers will kind of come in around it as needed, depending on where things are at from the program. That's the way I look at it.
I think there's another one too, just another thought, which is like a know yourself kind of thing, because I think if you're the type who doesn't you look at your steering committee and you're like, okay, I'm going to put my friends on the steering committee, or people who are in my organization. So maybe I'm the IAM program manager, I run the IAM team, so maybe I do delivery as well as I own it, and then I just fill the steering committee with people that work for me or that I get along with. That's probably going to fall short, right? Because those aren't the people who are going to wind up sinking your program or, talking bad about your program. The steering committee is not people you have to meet with every single day, right? This is once a quarter. It's a big part of its communication and achieving that buy-in. But I kind of think of like Abraham Lincoln with his cabinet, right? He had like all of his political foes, and they would challenge him and let him know, but hey, he'd rather have it there in his cabinet meetings and like work it out. And sometimes he had to overrule or whatever. But he didn't just surround himself with people who thought like he did or who would tell him what he wanted to hear. He surrounded himself with the people who would give him the opposing viewpoints. And that way, when they went public with something, it was already, all those viewpoints were already contemplated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want to surround yourself with sycophants, really in anything. It's good to have critical thinkers around it, I think. I'm not sure who said it. I want to say it was, I don't want to say who it was, but I think it was, keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer. I think sometimes the steering committee, or even an IM program in general, is sometimes political in nature, too, for an organization. You talked about the concept earlier of voting rights, which would be a huge hassle in my head if you're trying to actually run a program. But representation is a good thing because I think that allows you to bring in viewpoints from other areas. At least let those areas know that you considered, even if they don't have input into the final decision or any or sway on that part of it. At least their voice was heard, and as part of the decision making, okay, well, here's what we understand or like that, but we're still going to go this direction, even though that there is some friction somewhere. For the good of more people, maybe there's a decision being made, or maybe the risk is too great, or the cost is too great, or whatever it might be. I think there is an opportunity to make sure that you have the appropriate representation as part of the program. I don't know if it necessarily has to be part of the steering committee, but I do see that sometimes as a benefit to bringing some folks in, at least in a short time, to kind of smooth over the impact, right, of whatever it is that you're changing. Password policy, for example,
Yeah.
like you mentioned.
I think if possible, avoiding that voting rights
Yeah, it shouldn't be a
discussion
democracy.
is yeah, you don't want to lay it out as democracy, right? Because you don't want to have it be that, everybody has to be in favor or that you have to have a two-thirds majority. Like, if
Yeah.
you can avoid that conversation and just, because really one negative person could potentially sink the whole thing in some situations. In other situations, really, you may just have opinions all over the board and you just need to make a decision. So
Yeah.
you take counsel and then make a decision. I was thinking, though, of, scenarios where I've seen it the most is very formal governance in the higher ed space. So that usually what happens then is they already do a good job of IT governance and they've got an IT governance organization and more of that voting rights stuff might be baked into it. What I've also seen there is so the IM steering committee will usually plug into some kind of information assurance committee or something like that. So it's infosec, but it's also data security, data governance. So it kind of fits into that sphere. One thing that I've also seen is like when we're talking about IM steering committee, the word committee for some organizations means you're going to have formal notes taken and you're going to have to follow all these processes that aren't really appropriate for what you're trying to accomplish. You're really trying to have a meeting to get everybody on board with what you're doing and update them on what's been happening and things like that. Really trying to make sure that it's not like several months from time to time between people hearing from you. Um, and so I think in those cases, if you have to call it IM steering group, it's really about what you're accomplishing rather than the name that you must have a committee.
I'm glad you brought that up because yeah, committee is sometimes a scary word for some organizations. They think all of a sudden of all the bureaucracy and oh my gosh, this is going to be like so formal and we're going to need a lot of resources, to maintain this thing. Nah, man, like just get enough people in the room to be able to make a decision. Um,
Yeah.
you know, I you brought up an interesting point there around education. Why is it that they tend to be more mature when it comes to governing bodies? Is just the nature of the business of higher ed? I mean, we've worked with a few, and it seems like you're right on that. Like, yeah, they've got like a bunch of committees that already exist that are responsible for certain areas, and you know, they might already have an IEM committee of some sort, or if you recommend it because they don't have it today, it's most likely that that work is getting done somewhere else, and maybe now it's the time to separate it out as part of its own committee. But it seems like higher ed just they're generally on top of things from a governance perspective, not so much everywhere else.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. And I think some of it might be the nature of what they do, right? They're focused on higher education. They try to do things structurally correct, and I think as an industry, it's like you don't want to not do it at all, right? When pretty much everybody else is doing it. So I think there's that angle to it, but I also think there's the sensical matter, and we could have talked to Adam about this, right, when we had him on the
Yeah, we could have.
audio podcast. Um, but I think part of it is like there's a very real need for it because a lot of the within a university there's a bunch of colleges. So you have like the College of Business, College of Education, College of Veterinary Science, all these different colleges. And a lot of these colleges are so big they'll have their own IT departments. And so basically the governance becomes the body where decisions get made. Which also kind of leads me to, I don't want to gloss over this, right? Because I don't want to leave folks behind who might be thinking your steering committee is where you're going to decide, you know, how do we handle leave of absence, right? Or something like that, right? We got this specific issue, like how are we going to deal with it? To me, that is not what the steering committee is for. Steering committee isn't like your decision making body on like one particular process like that. Now, if the impact of that process is big enough, maybe it is something you bring to the steering committee. But I'm trying to think of an example where it's not, right? It's
Yeah.
a project level decision, it's a working group level decision, and maybe going to the steering committee as an inform, just to let them know.
Yeah, versus like I'm thinking like an organizational policy versus a service being delivered to the organization itself, for example. Because I think you could have
Right.
committees for any number of things. I think we talk about identity because that's what we know. But you can have there's plenty of committees for things like architecture review boards and IT
Yes.
software boards. They're all the same thing. It's just a group of people who have gotten together to say, hey, we need to put some more, governance or rules around this. Make sure we're not buying duplicate tools. Make sure we're not, creating architecture that we can't support, right? Or things like that. Identity is the same thing. You have a service that you're delivering to the organization, and you want to have, the right buy-in and the right people to be able to weigh in and make sure that those decisions are aligning, with the overall strategy of things.
Yeah.
Versus like, how
But
many
the
days
reason I
off
thought
can
it
you
was,
get?
yeah, right. Well, I thought the reason I brought that up because I feel like we started the conversation with the example of password policy, which in some people's minds like, okay, well, you bring the password policy to the steering committee, and now something like leave of absence, you're telling me don't bring that to the steering committee. And
Just a
I
different steering
think they're
committee.
well, it's also that I mean you have to use your values, right? I'm not telling you which things to bring to the steering committee, but I think the steering committee has to be like a senior group, and you can't bore them with details that don't matter. The reason I said bring the password policy thing is that's just such a hot button issue, right? If you have like an extra step in the password change process or something like that, I wouldn't bring that as a steering committee. But if you're going to change the password policy, I think that's at least something that you ought to tell the steering committee, hey, we're going to work on that. And if you want to have input, let me know. You get plugged in. And then come back to the next steering committee meeting and it's like, we're ready to roll out the password change policy. We had the working group. Here's who was involved. Here's what all their input was. Hopefully at that point you're not running into, well, I know I haven't been involved, but I totally think all the work you did sucks. It
Yeah.
probably will happen. But you know, like and that's why you don't want to take every little drip drab detail because you'll never get anything done.
Yeah. I think there's different types of meetings. Some of them you're asking for permission to do things, and some of them you're telling people, here's what we're going to do. And they're more of a
Yeah.
informed meeting versus a may I do this meeting. Steering
Right.
committees are the
No,
same way.
that's right.
Yeah. So we've talked about who's on it, what it is. I think we've started to talk a little bit here about when do we need a steering committee, because I think this is kind of one of the first steps that an IAM program starts to figure out is, okay, we've got Jim running it, and Jim's been running it for fine, for fine for years, but now we're starting to kind of grow the team and grow the services. Is when should we have that committee? Does it make sense to start it now? Is it we need to have a minimum of 5 people be part of it before we think that there's a committee? I guess, when's the right time to create an IAM steering committee?
Interesting angle. So one of the things I was thinking with when is how often should the steering committee meet? So I'm going to circle back to that.
Okay.
But I think what you're asking is like when have you reached that level of maturity that you need
Yeah.
a steering committee? And I think the answer it's kind of obscure, but it's when you're big enough to have a program, you're probably big enough to have a steering committee. And so I don't think that's the same answer for everybody. I think when organizations say, hey, we are going to become a public company, that's probably the time where they need a steering committee. Um, you can't just base on a number of employees. You might have 200, 300 employees and a million customers. So
Mm-hmm.
then you may need a steering committee. But I think if you're starting to see the cracks evolve where communications aren't really tight, people aren't in the know, you're having problems
Decisions
with
aren't being
buy-in,
made. Yeah.
decisions aren't being made, then it's probably about the time where you need a steering committee a month ago. And I think that's fine. Like, when you get to that point, that's what the time to spin it up.
It's one of those
People
things where you kind of
realize,
like,
hey,
when you need it, and maybe it's
yeah,
if you have a good feel and pulse of the organization, you kind of know, okay, yeah, maybe we should kind of formalize this a little bit. It doesn't have to be crazy though, right? It could be, rather than doing things over email, maybe it's, hey, let's just get together and sync up, every month or every quarter, just to make sure that we're on the same page. That could be how it starts.
that's how it could start. I think
Mm-hmm.
that exactly what I was going to say is I think that's how it could start. I think most of the time when we talk to organizations that don't have a steering committee that say, hey, we got an IAM program or an IAM problem, come in and help us with a strategy. They neither have an IAM program manager or an owner, nor a steering committee. And I think the two kind of go hand in hand. If you're going to run a program, you need to identify who your subject matter experts are. You need to involve them appropriately in the decision making, appropriately in communication. You want them to kind of hold you accountable for making the progress towards strategy, and you want to be able to hold them accountable to evangelize the message out to their their people within the organization. And so it's all about running a good program. I mean, if you're running a good program, I think baseline level one maturity is you have to have good communications. And this is just a forum for having those good communications.
That can also be a spot where ownership can reside too for things, right? So a lot of times they'll have the conversation, well, who owns IAM? Maybe there's an owner, maybe there isn't. Maybe it's a few different owners. And maybe those few owners, if you think about it, like, maybe InfoSec is part of it, but the, IT is the one who's actually implementing the tools. And maybe you've got, a help desk that's actually doing like onboarding. Maybe it's some sort of, plan, build, run, triumvirate, right? That kind of forms together to say, okay, let's just make sure that we've got the right people who are making the right decisions, for things across
Yeah,
those different areas.
right on.
You mentioned earlier, before we started this section, that you were thinking about how often do people need to meet as a steering committee. Where are you going to go with that one?
Well, can I bounce that one to you first? Because I'd be interested to hear what you say.
I think it's dynamic in that where you meet minimum maybe once a quarter, but there may be times where it's accelerated because you're in a specific project rollout or capability rollout, and maybe it's every 2 weeks for 2 or 3 months because it's a very important time for the program, and maybe there's eyes on it from different parts of the executive level, right? And you have to kind of push through things. I think at a minimum would be once a quarter, but I don't think it's a hard and fast rule. I think you will have more frequent meetings at the very beginning of an IAM program, at the beginning of a deployment, or maybe key deployment phases of, hey, we're rolling out MFA and here's how it's going to work. And you've maybe got 2 or 3 of those meetings where you've got all the key decision makers in the room. They're aware of how it's going to happen. They are then able to go and talk to their peers who might be at higher levels within the organization, right? Kind of socialize it that way too. So I prefer the term dynamic with some minimums. How
Yeah,
about that?
I couldn't agree more. I think it's a balancing act, right? Because one of our advices was you want to have senior people. Well, you're not going to get senior people every month
Yeah, they're
to
hard
come to these
to,
meetings. Now,
to track
if
down.
you allow delegates, which a lot of times is might be better, right? I mean, the delegates might be able to give you what you need. They are the lieutenant to the person who you really need supporting you,
Like a small
but they
council, maybe,
actually
Jim?
know. Yeah, so it could be like that.
Yeah. Hopefully
Um,
it's not that cutthroat for Game of Thrones fans
yeah,
out there.
right. You need to have your little finger.
A Littlefinger, a
Um,
Varys. Yeah, who knows, right? Every organization has their version of the politics.
yeah, I mean, I think if you can get those delegates and they're people who they have the person's ear, the VP's ear, for example, but they really know the guts of what's going on. The VP maybe isn't that close to it. That might be a better person to have on the steering committee on,
Hmm.
an actual basis. Um, and so then you can maybe do it more often. And I
Yeah.
think you made up a great point. Made a great point there, which is, having a special session of the steering committee might be what you need. Is you're like, hey guys, we've gone through our testing plan now. We're leaving tests and we're going into deploy. We're going to go live in 2 weeks. We're going to have a meeting now so that everybody just knows the status of where things are at, right? And a focused session on that. I think that's a really good move. Once you've built that kind of rapport with your steering committee, um, I think you'll have the support you need, and they'll feel comfortable coming to you and saying, "Hey, we got a concern. The day you're planning on going live, we're also going live with this major ERP upgrade. Not a great time to do too much change at one time."
Yeah.
Or worst case scenario would be like, yeah, we're cutting over our network to a whole new IP range that weekend. Like that would be completely terrible to, that's why we're really glad we did this meeting.
Yeah. What do you mean? We just established privileged session monitoring and recorded capabilities, and now you're changing all the IPs for all the servers?
Yeah. Great.
WTF, man? Anything else
Yeah.
you want to talk
So,
about from a steering committee perspective?
no, well, this is kind of something that we preach, right? Is that
Yeah.
the path to maturity when it comes to running a program is formalization. Formalization is a big part of formalizing the governance of how your IAM program is going to work is to have that buy-in to make sure there's proper communication. So it kind of starts here. I mean, it really, like when we get into building out strategies, we usually start here because it's like who's going to run IAM, and you can say like, yeah, Jeff owns IAM. Jeff's going to run IAM, but ultimately Jeff can't do that by himself. He
Mm-hmm.
needs other people, and this is how you get those other people on your side. That's kind of my pitch for the steering committee.
I'm sold. We should do it. The only problem I have with this is this concept of formalization. The word itself, just for whatever reason, I think of like tuxedo, you know, black tie affair, like very stiff and structured, and there's no room for, you know, stretching.
Kind of
I
makes you
don't.
gag, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like I just hate that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, at least standardize it. Let's just have a plan and have a cadence and make sure we've got the right people in decision. If that's what you want to call formalization, cool, right? That sounds good to me. But having decision makers routinely in sync and able to make decisions on the project will make IAM go so much easier for people.
Let me give you an example of what I mean by formalization. Let's see if you still feel that way. So we have a policy that passwords need to be 10 characters. And then we have a system over here that say, no, our system requires 8 characters. We're just going to go to 8 characters. A formal program might say, no, you need to file an exception, and that exception needs to have somebody within your organization, VP level or higher, accept the risk of being out of compliance with our policy. So if it ultimately comes back, or instead of 8 character, 10 character passage, that's kind of sounds too shared accounts, and they say we can't live without shared accounts. We have to have shared accounts. Our vendors use shared accounts, and we're just going to do that. Do you think they should formally have to go through an exception approval and somebody own the risk, or we could just informally just say, okay, that's a phone call or an email, and we're just going to do that?
I think there should be a process or a standard to follow. So I think in this case, I'm spinning the word formalization into, okay, we know that it's never going to be a one size fits all, but here is the process when we find something that does not align. And here are the steps that are part of that process that we've agreed to as an organization to follow. So I would see it as, yes, like formalization. I'm just thinking in a different, terminology of here's a standard. Our standard is 10 characters. The mainframe stinks and can only do 8 characters. They're going to get a waiver because the mainframe is, despite what everyone's been saying for years, right? Mainframe is still alive and well. They're not going to change. So, okay, here is the process by which somebody somewhere or some group has decided, okay, we will grant the waiver to the mainframe because it is what it is. Everything else
Right.
needs to follow the standard. But if there's something else that comes through, that new app or service would go through the same process to get whatever it is, exception or waiver it may be.
Yeah. When I think of process, I think of formalization. Well, it's not tradition, right? It's
Yeah.
more than tradition. Our tradition, when we're not going to follow the policy, is just we just don't follow the policy. No, somebody's got to like put it in writing. Someone's got to own it. And look, the bigger the corporation, the more risk averse the corporation. If you have 100,000 people working in your company, like doing it less than formal, it's just not going to cut the mustard. Especially if you are a regulated body, and some of those policies that you have are driven out of being in compliance with regulation. Multi-factor
Mm-hmm.
authentication everywhere. We can't do multi-factor for this app. We built it in 1972 and it is what it is. Okay, well, somebody is going to have to own that risk. somebody's gonna have to own that risk. That's my perspective,
Yeah.
because I think that also starts to get the attention of the business to say, "Oh shoot, if I got to own the risk now, I don't want to sign off on this risk every year.
Right.
You guys who work for me, you're gonna have to fix this."
Yeah. I think a committee sometimes is also a response to some sort of deficiency the organization has seen. They have waited too long to have an IAM steering committee, and now they've run into control issues or audit issues or whatever it may be. And now people are recognizing, oh, wait, yeah, Jeff's been doing his own thing, and it's time to maybe put some eyes on that, or multiple people getting together. So sometimes the steering committee is the management response that goes back to the audit to say, okay, we recognize this as an issue. We will form a steering committee to make sure that we are in alignment with XYZ, GDPR, HIPAA, PCI, whatever,
Sure.
right? Whatever regulations that are out there. So sometimes it's
Right.
after something has happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point.
All right. I think we've waxed poetic enough about that. So it's April Fool's. We've been going for 47 minutes. We have not played any jokes. I promise a safe place. I'm still keeping that promise. Anything else before we wrap it up for this week?
Are you able to do any of your soundboard right now?
I always have it here ready to go. Is there something specific you'd like to hear that I have queued up?
Give me your most April Fool's soundboard item. So, for anybody who doesn't know, Jeff has like expensive podcasting equipment that he bought with his own money.
Because I'm a freaking nerd.
He's got a love of the game. No, he's got a love of the game.
I gotta tell you,
I've
it's
got-
awesome for Zoom calls. That's for sure. Like just the quality, having even the little simple things like a noise gate that will, only turn your mic on when you hit a certain threshold is fantastic. Like clicks and clacks and stuff like that generally don't get picked up. So it's not just for podcasting. Get
Right.
yourself a nice audio interface, and you can do a lot of things even just on Teams or Zoom calls.
We've had a lot of cool experiences with our audio only podcast with our guests and some of their setup. Like, Adam at Texas A&M, he leveraged the university, had some podcasting booths, and that was really cool. And then, what was it? I'm coming up short of his name, the guy from Okta.
Oh,
But he had a
he had a really nice
Sammy.
setup. Sammy, yeah. Yeah,
really
he had
nice
like a
setup.
cool
Yeah.
little I don't know if it was like it was like a separate outdoor office type thing, and probably in part of his yard, and it was set up very much like a studio type environment because he does a lot of visual presentations and things like that. So it
Right.
was kind of a cool setup. I've been working on mine. I've got a green screen up right now because obviously this is not my real background. I mean, I know Jim, you live in a library and you've got a lot of books, but I've been actually working on my real background for when I'm on video calls, which is a lot these days. So at least I have something interesting to look at behind me.
Oh, what is that I smell? The rich smell of mahogany and leather.
The rich mahogany lover. Brandon, our guy Brandon, who is generally listener of the week. You'd love to have a soundboard for some of the client meetings. You don't have to. You don't have to up to code encryption. Wah wah wah. Yeah, you play like the sad trombone, something like that. Every once in a while, I will play something, a sound effect on a call. You gotta use it judiciously. You can't just have it all the time. You don't want to overplay it, but a well-timed, laugh or crickets or applause to emphasize something that's happening in the call, super memorable, right? I mean, who does that, right? What kind of nerd does that? But I pick and choose my spots. I probably do it once every couple of months, maybe. So it's not something that happens very often, but it certainly is entertaining, and people don't forget that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, and I think like you said, you have to pick and choose your spots. You don't want to do it and somebody like takes it the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, roar of applause for that statement, Jim.
There you go. April Fool's joke, everybody.
Yeah, there you go. All right, I think that's it for this week. If you like what you saw, hit that like and subscribe button. If you don't like what you saw, I don't care, hit it anyway. Send it to somebody that you don't like. We just like people who want to check us out. Obviously, we're here on YouTube. We try to do it weekly. Sometimes life gets in the way, so we kind of have to do some dynamic shifting of schedules and things like that, such as we did today. We've got our podcast, of course, IDAC podcast.com, IDAC podcast on Twitter. We've got a new show coming out on Monday with, let's see, that'll be the 4th, I believe, with Julie Smith from the Identity Defined Security Alliance, which is kind of a fun one in honor of Identity Management Day 2022, which is coming up on April 12th. So that's coming out on Monday. Anything else, Jimmy?
Not much, man. I do like the name Jimmy, though.
Yeah. Should I change your title?
Would you mind?
I can change it to Jimmy.
All right.
I can change it to whatever
Jimmy
I
Mac.
want, actually.
Jimmy Mac, I am. Yeah, you could. You could. That could have been a good April Fool's joke.
Yeah.
No, I think the audio podcast is still like our big item. We go live with something every Monday, and I think that's just that's the format I prefer. Like listening to other people rather than, we've gotten some comments like from folks who are, watch us. It's like kind of weird to just watch two talking heads. But
blah,
nobody
blah.
ever complains. Yeah, nobody ever complains about the audio.
Well, shout out to Denise. Great job, guys. Thank you, Denise.
Thanks.
Looking
Steve.
forward to seeing you again sometime in the future. Whenever it is we travel, it is. Okay, I think that's enough talking heads for one day. We'll go ahead and leave it for this week. And we'll catch everyone in the next one. Talk to you later.
Bye, guys.